Welcome in to the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. We are headlong going over a cliff towards the holidays, folks. We're almost there. And boy, we have a good one tonight. I tell you, our guest that was supposed to be with us here, Steve Asher, is not with us tonight. He had a bit of a emergency medical. It's not horribly serious, folks. He had a little bit of a medical thing. And so he'll be back with us in January. So we'll get back to him in January. But boy, did we get a heck of a replacement for you. In fact, sorry, Steve, maybe a better guest than you. I hate to do that, but it's the truth. I just, we got a heck of a fill-in. I'll just put it that way. In fact, one of my all-time favorite guests. So there, ninny, Steve. I hate to put it that way, but you know what? I never do this, but I'm going to be petty. I just was petty. There you go. Our guest tonight is Dr. Heather Lynn, who's back with us on the program. And Dr. Lynn's latest project, which we'll talk about at a different time. I want to have her back on when I actually get a chance to sink into the book and get a chance to read it, is Anunnaki-Revelation, Hidden History, Altered States, and the Mystery of Humanity, which sounds amazing, folks. So by the way, we'll have a link in the description of this program so you can go get that book and read up on it before we have her back on. But just in case you are not aware, let me tell you a little bit about Heather before we jump in. Heather's an author, historian, renegade archaeologist. By the way, she's also got a wonderful podcast specializing in the investigation of hidden histories, forbidden artifacts, and the symbolic systems that have shaped human civilization. She's known for challenging conventional narratives and making complex historical subjects accessible. She brings a rare interdisciplinary lens to her work. Her undergraduate training in archaeology and information technology led to a master's in history, followed by a doctorate in education from the University of New England and a doctorate in comparative religion. Her doctoral research at UNE examined how history museums communicate with the public in the digital age, exploring how institutions shape cultural memory, identity, and civic engagement through technology. This work bridged museum studies, sociology, and communications theory, offering insights into how societies curate their own narratives and what those choices reveal about power, heritage, and truth. Her current research explores the intersection of archaeology, mythology, and power, forgotten temples, anomalous artifacts, elite rituals, and the selective preservation of history. She doesn't confine herself to the academic mainstream, nor does she chase the fringe for spectacle. Instead, her work asks why certain truths remain buried and what that reveals about the human condition. Let's bring her in now. Back to Darkness Radio. Thank you so much tonight, Dr. Heather Lynn, for joining us here on Darkness Radio.
Thank you so much for having me. It is a real honor to be asked on such a short notice, too.
I got to tell you, you're one of my all-time favorites.
That's awesome. Thank you. I don't know what I've done to deserve that, but I'll take it.
There's just this vibe there, you know? I mean, we can get together, we can chop it up, we can have a good time talking about these amazing subjects that you cover, and it just flows naturally, right?
I agree. I feel like it's hardly an interview and more of a conversation.
That's right. That's right. And it's a good conversation at that.
Always.
So why don't we just jump into what we were supposed to jump into tonight a little bit, which is, let's just skim the surface a little bit. Near death and reincarnation. I'm curious as far as I know you've delved into that subject a little bit. And I know with the work that you've done when you've been on Ancient Aliens, I know there's a little bit of talk of reincarnation when it comes to like Egyptian societies and coming back to this world and maybe living multiple lives. I'm curious, Dr. Heather, where you come from when it comes to reincarnation and where you sit when it comes to reincarnation.
Wow, that's an interesting one too, because there's so many different backgrounds that have believed in that sort of thing that you wouldn't think. Like Christianity used to have a long tradition of accepting transmigration of souls and reincarnation in that way. So it's something that isn't so strange in a lot of ways to the ancient world and to a lot of different people cross-culturally. But in our more contemporary period, it's been relegated to sort of pseudoscience or woo or new age. But I while there's no real, I don't think, scientific evidence for it, I don't know how anybody could rule it out. It's sort of a maybe to me, it's akin to saying there's no God. It's like, yeah, well, don't be so sure. Like I don't really have much time for atheists. I would rather someone be agnostic because to claim either way, I think is foolish. Now, I happen to believe there's a higher power, but I would feel that somebody who is a little more intellectually honest should say, I don't think there's a higher power, but how would I know? We don't really know. And so to be able to say definitively, oh no, I can prove there's no God. I mean, I've spoken to my share of astrophysicists and people with lots of credentials in the hard sciences, and it's been my experience that often once they get up to a particular level of inquiry, they start then going back to those questions of faith and maybe even accepting this idea that there could be a creator or some first cause. So I think when it comes to such huge questions that are spiritually based, like reincarnation, I think we really have to say, one, we don't know, but two, what did people think in the past? And why is it that we think so differently now? So when I'm in a juxtaposition of these sorts of options, like, well, do we take a modern or contemporary view? Or, I tend to look towards the ancient world because that's a like early peer review in a lot of ways, something that's been looked at and practiced and researched and thought of and argued and discussed for maybe thousands of years. I think that constitutes a sort of folk peer review for me. So I really value ancient wisdom. And that ancient wisdom tradition, many traditions speak of reincarnation. So I wouldn't just be so quick to brush it off.
It's interesting because scientists now are kind of jumping in with both feet and studying young ones who say, that was me. That was me in that past life. And the people or young ones who take their parents to certain locations and say, I remember dying in that building, or young ones who have, birthmarks that are scars and then say, well, this is where I was shot in the head, and then can tell the story, and then they back it up with evidence, and then they trace this evidence back. Um, these stories of reincarnations, and then scientists say, well, then let's trace it back. If they have the evidence, let's trace it back and let's try and make the pieces fit. But yet they don't want to go above and beyond to trace that last piece, which is, okay, so the soul had to travel somewhere in order to come back. And why is it that science doesn't want to do the ethereal piece of this?
Yeah, well, it's probably very difficult to even try to measure because remember, science is about essentially measurement. So you're going to measure and quantify and try to repeat a system in order to understand it, to model it. And that's going to be something very difficult with the reincarnation like that. It's always been interesting, though, to hear those stories about, kids that come back and say that they remember things. They have some sort of a, of course, we do hear the stories of people saying, I was Cleopatra. And it's like, you're always Cleopatra. They're never anybody like that mundane. It's always somebody interesting. But it makes me think, though, a little bit of maybe the Jungian perspective of it. Like, could this all be maybe a collective consciousness question? Not to say that they're not individually being reincarnated, but what about that? What about perhaps there's an element of this huge collective consciousness that they are remembering or bringing into perspective somehow? So I don't know. I wonder too if it's maybe not a false memory, but some other thing that they're touching on. So maybe Carl Jung, especially when he wrote in the archetypes and the collective unconscious and memories, dreams and reflections, one of his bigger tomes on this. He said the human psyche contains essentially patterns that express the natures of life, death, and all of these things that you think of when you think of like archetypes, things like in stories. So you have dreams, myths, religious imagery also present into this sort of idea, not necessarily of an individual soul jumping into a new body, but more as the ego's periodic death and rebirth within a lifetime, transformations of consciousness that renews itself. So if you think about something like the Jungian perspective of the collective consciousness, It's almost like there's this big pool of existence, maybe in a Gnostic view, like it's the pleroma, like we're all somewhere, like the potentiality of something. So, maybe something like what people would call past life memories, maybe they just come from that collective unconscious where ancestral archetypal experiences are stored, sometimes referred to as Akashic records. So perhaps they dream of ancient lives, because there are people who do that aside from children. You'll hear people who go into deep hypnotic trances and recount these lives they used to have. But maybe it's because not necessarily their individual soul, but because of their psyche is drawing on this deep memory of humanity and it's coming out in them somehow. And it's a little like abstract, perhaps, but I sort of take that Jungian perspective. That it's more of a psychological truth than a literal one. But again, that doesn't mean that it's not true. It just means that it is a different understanding, and maybe it's not something that the hard sciences can actually physically measure. But I think in something like the soft sciences, maybe like that qualitative measurement, hypnosis, psychology, any of that, you might be able to have a deeper understanding of it. That's my view at least, and I think that there is something there. What that there is, I mean, who knows, right? I think it's fascinating though. I've never met one of those children though. I think that might freak me out to be honest, because they seem real convincing. Like
I'll
there's something there.
I'll tell you, I've said this on the show before. So it's not a new story to any of my viewers or listeners. But in high school, we were studying in honors history class. We were studying the Knights Templar, and I had a at the time. I think my history teacher thought I was sleeping, but I closed my eyes to listen to his story intently, and it felt like I was dreaming, but I knew I wasn't dreaming. I was fully aware of everything he was saying, but I had a vision of of brown skinned men with earrings in their nose and their ears, the big hoop earrings, but bald. Um, and they were standing in front of a Templar, and it was a Templar whose body was laying in the sand, but his head was severed. And it was like I was swooping in a movie camera, and I saw his head laying in the sand and blood coming out from underneath it. And they were holding a large sword
Wow.
and speaking to each other in a foreign language, but I was understanding what they were saying in the foreign language. And the one said, "Is he dead?" And the other said, "The light is not quite out of his eyes, but he's as good as dead."
Wow.
And at that point, my perspective switches from looking at the it was basically, it was the head, but the head was in armor, right? Or in an armored cage. Um, my view goes from outside to inside the actual face mask. And I'm looking at the two men looking at me. And then I just see everything go dark.
Wow.
And I see
Wow.
the blood running out from underneath my neck.
Wow. That's wild. It makes well, so in on one hand that you could say that this is a vivid memory or a vision or something like that and look at it through that I hate to sound disparaging when I say soft science versus hard science, but it is a term. So when you want to look at it from that soft science point of view or something that might be more symbolic, but there is also another angle that modern physics sort of could could maybe explain at least a little bit, or it's tantalizing. We'll say that in quantum theory, time isn't a straight line, so space and time form a unified field, and at its most fundamental level, the past, present, and future are all sort of at one in what physicists call the block universe. So every moment exists simultaneously. It's our perception, though, that moves through it like a needle across like a record.
Mhm.
So it's all happening at once. And if that's true, at least in that theory, then what we think of as a past life could just be another point in space time that's just unfolding, and our consciousness might be capable of resonating with those sort of coordinates or points on, say, the record. In other words, like a vision like that, if you're a child, could be like a quantum echo. So not even imagination or just the perception bleeding through the just the dimensional fabric of, space and time, which I know sounds out there, but it is sort of a balanced view between the psychology and physics. So there, I think that while it'd be hard to quantify, I don't think it'd be impossible. Maybe at least in that quantum level, a theoretical level, that it could be tackled. But I don't know that so many people are interested in funding that sort of research or doing that. But so I guess
Yeah.
we'll have to wait to see.
Right. I mean, at that point, you could say, well, are you flashing back to what actually happened to you? Are you picking up on whatever it was the teacher was talking about? Like psychically, you're flashing back to whatever happened in that moment that the teacher's talking about? Or are you picking up on something completely different? Or are you daydreaming? Are you imagining what it was that the teacher was talking about and you're playing it out in your own head? Right.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, there's a lot of different things that could have happened in that particular moment. I mean, you could get
Yeah.
really skeptical on the deal too, right?
Yeah, but it's always interesting. So you could say, well, we should know better than, we're modern people. But, the thing is, you look at the past, you look at all the faith traditions and the ancient wisdom, and it's there. It's there and it echoes throughout time. So it has to be something fundamentally interesting, at least to humans, that it stays within our framework and our questions for so long. So I think it's one of those things that will nag at us until we actually solve the problem, hopefully at some point eventually.
Eventually. The other thing that makes me think that science really does want to break that wall, that self-imposed wall that they put there on the other side, Heather, is that they've introduced this whole quantum physical heaven idea that, okay, we won't subscribe to religion or the metaphysical, but we'll throw a quantum physical holding pen up there that we'll call heaven. Um, what are your thoughts on that? Are you familiar with the theory?
I've heard of that one and a few other ideas. So people are trying to speculate on that. I think so it's the same principles, I guess, that make quantum theory strange in and of itself. So it's one of these things like superposition or non-locality and all of these things. So that when you start getting into that realm of reality, it's not bound anymore to ordinary space-time and the way that we experience it. So in popular discussion, then it gets translated into things like quantum heaven, or sometimes they've said like quantum afterlife. I mean, the appeal of it is that if reality at a fundamental level is not strictly linear in time, and if consciousness is not strictly reducible to matter, then maybe consciousness persists in domains not described by classical physics. And so it does leave it open. It leaves it open. Now, there's no experimentally verified component of the quantum theory that predicts or requires an afterlife or immortal consciousness or anything like that. But, there's a lot of weird things that make it so that people are questioning now what space time really is. And so things like relativity and its view of time, and special and general relativity, which is interesting in and of itself because, of course, there's general relativity, and then all of a sudden we had to have special relativity because there's some strangeness. And so, in those, time is part of the geometry of space time. And there's no single objective now shared across all observers. And so, this leads to the philosophical idea known as the block universe, where, like I mentioned, all things past, present, and future exist in a four-dimensional manifold. So, some will interpret this as supporting a like a metaphysics in which all moments are equally real. And so, it's not necessarily confirmation of an afterlife, but then you have quantum interpretations like the many worlds, which sort of posits that all possible outcomes of quantum events occur in these non-interacting branches. So sometimes that's misread as like a literal parallel worlds of experience, but physics does tell us that consciousness travels between those branches. So it's kind of, again, we're using these terms, but I challenge anybody in any discipline to actually describe and define consciousness legitimately. Like, what is the actual definition of consciousness? You will not get a solid definition. Some people will say one thing, others will say something else. They'll say it's non-local, they'll say it's an epiphenomenon of the brain. Who knows? So there in and of itself, it's like we're working with dark matter. It's like a placeholder to explain something we just don't understand. So it's just kind of important to know that even when we talk about these really well-developed ideas, they're still just based off like ideas of ideas. So, it's some people like to use quantum physics as a metaphor, because the universe at its base is just not like classical common sense. Time may not be absolute because possibilities in quantum theory don't behave like they do every day. There might be room for consciousness to persist after death, then.
Mhm.
So, in actual physics, there's no verified theory of an afterlife and no real empirical evidence that consciousness does survive after death, although there have been some recent little developments in that. But we don't know. But it's kind of interesting because I think the more we lean into the quantum elements of things, the more it opens us up to those possibilities that there could be something. And it's not just as a way to sort of shoehorn spiritual ideas. I know a lot of people may feel that way because it's like as soon as you don't understand, you can say, well, it's quantum heaven. How about a quantum hell? I mean, we could just get really just using quantum in front of something to just excuse it for not being provable. But that's really not the case because the field is developed in so many different ways. It can at least be mathematically modeled out, and it does lead to some real world materialist results. So I think that it's not just a throwaway statement to try to like kick it over to the quantum realm. I think that's exactly where we need to move as a society to start looking into the possibilities of other modes of being and understanding. So, but I think that's coming with time and new generations of scientists. So, yeah, I think the answer is just around the corner, really.
So much like everybody wants to stuff things into a quantum field and call it a day, in your understanding, in your mind, and in your training, does everybody want to stuff the mind, the heart, and their soul into one box and say, well, it all goes to heaven in one shot? Or is there separation there? Are they all different things? Does the mind stick around while the heart and soul move on? Are they different entities?
Hmm. Well, that's a that's a guy. It's going to depend on like who you're asking in what fields because everybody has those sorts of opinions. So I would say that in the alternative realm, we'll say it's people are much more spiritually inclined. I think a lot of people want to believe that pure consciousness is all that exists, and that can take it to that extreme level where you get into something like Gnosticism, where you believe that, in different branches of Gnosticism, of course, where you believe that we are corrupt, or the material world is inherently bad and corrupted, and all that exists is the spirit, and that needs to make its way back to, the whole. On the extreme opposite end of that, you have what we're sort of living in now, which is like a materialist reductionism. It's a very powerful system, and so that's a bit of where we're at today in a scientific perspective. Reality is nothing but matter and physical law, and that's it. Consciousness, meaning, values, things like that are ultimately reducible to just brain states and evolutionary functions. And in science, we would explain phenomenon using natural causes because that's what our tools can test. And this is a rule of the game and just not metaphysics. And so you just have sort of one or the other. And so it would really depend on where you're coming from methodologically, like what is your perspective, what you think. And so I think that's the big problem, really, because if you look at both fields, so if you're looking at things academically, maybe in whatever field you're working in, you do again have like a quantitative analysis, mathematically based data. Qualitative is more like stories and phenomenology and trying to understand things, and you kind of infer a lot. Now I and others believe that the mixed methods approach gives you a much better outcome. So it's sort of that middle way. So you have people who are materialist reductionists, and they're saying science is just basically its own religion, and that's all that matters is what we can feel and measure, and that's truth. And then you have the people who are like, it's all consciousness, there's nothing else. It's like, sure, but how about in between? It's both, because when you separate the mind and body, that's where we start getting these problems. I think that you don't separate that. I think they're one and the same. Now, the body, it is fleeting. It is corrupted. It's obviously because we die, but maybe we don't have to die. A lot of people are trying to work towards life extension technology, and of course, that's a whole nother ethical conundrum, a Pandora's box. Like, should we even be doing that? I don't know. There's a lot of arguments for or against it. That's a whole nother show. But the fact remains, in this world, we are corrupted insofar as we do die. We're mortal. Consciousness may be all that exists, but I think that the middle way is always the one that might bring you like a clearer view. So I think that's the problem, is that there is a these camps and they're all split, and that if we could bring it all together in one big sort of understanding, I feel like that's where we'd make big breakthroughs.
I just want to expound on that one point briefly, and then we'll start to work our way towards break. And that's this: when you talk about life extension and you talk about trying to extend the body in order to, in order to continue life here on this physical plane. I don't know if you agree with this or not. I'll throw my point out there, and then I'll have you kind of expound on it. And that's this: it kind of like much like the seasons in a tree, right? When you've got the spring, it kind of comes to life. It in summer it blooms. In the fall, it starts to, the leaves start to fall off. It's matured. In the winter, it dies, right? And it seems like as we get into the fall of our existence, and we start to bloom, and you see these beautiful, these colors. You see things, even though we're withering, you see that matureness there. It seems like to me, as we get older, into our older years, we're exploding with knowledge, and we're dying just to give that knowledge to others. We're hoping they'll take it. Although, as they say, youth is wasted on the young, right?
Totally.
Um, and you want to hand that down. But you've accrued everything that's happened in these other seasons. And to me, it would seem like, okay, if you want to extend it and you want to try and put off winter, doesn't it seem like the soul and the mind are kind of starting to wither along with, in that the soul is also kind of withering, the mind is also kind of withering along with the body? It all is kind of one package. Like it's all kind of deteriorating at the same time. So if you try to keep one thing going, like I think we already try to do it with machines at the end. We're saying, well, if we can give them a little more life, let's try to give them a little more life. But it seems like sometimes the soul or the mind just kind of goes, you know what, let's just shut down. It doesn't matter if the body wants to go on. So it kind of seems like the whole thing is one system. And when the expiration date comes up, it doesn't really matter. What's your thought on that?
That is an interesting perspective too. I think it's definitely an integrated system. If we extend the body without tending the mind and the soul, then you don't get more wisdom. You just get a longer version of decline. So, like real life extension has to mean extending vitality, clarity, and meaning, and not just simply adding years and, growing our telomeres and things like that. But So that might very well be one of the bigger questions that people who are involved in life extension technology, transhumanism, H plus, all of these movements, that they may need to look more closely at that, along with all the other ethical issues that that they are looking at, and we hope they look at more. But this is another thing to consider, that it's not just about the ethics, but also the efficacy, because currently life extension technology is mostly aimed at the body's deterioration. So things like cancer risk and neurodegeneration. And even if people make real progress there, you do have the deeper questions like, does extending the organism extend the person, the actual human? So the mind and soul, they're not really interchangeable categories. But the worry behind this is very real. If consciousness and personality are tightly coupled to the brain, then extending lifespan without addressing the aging brain will risk extending the period of decline and fragility, and not even the period of wisdom, too. So I think longevity without preserved executive function becomes just that prolonged late stage vulnerability. Not a longer autumn of meaning rather, but like, just gosh, I think when you describe it seasonally like that, and I'm thinking of autumn, it's a really nice way to put it. Because then what if you move into winter? It's kind of barren, right? I mean, we think of winter as being barren. So it is a very poetic way to put it, that perhaps um, that's one of the bigger questions that we need to think of more in the scientific community. In many traditions, the withering of the ego is not just a decline. It's like a thinning that can make room for a different kind of perception. So something like, in Jungian terms, of course, later life shifts from like achievement towards integration and making peace with the shadow and all of that. But again, like just simply extending your biological life won't automatically extend wisdom. So I just think that's a really great question. And I think that's something that you don't hear a lot of people bringing into the conversation, but I think really needs to. So if you are going to be maybe one of the special ones that works on this, maybe someone should think of themselves as an evergreen. I mean, a nice, timely thing this
Yeah.
time of year for some, but if you're going into that winter, you should preserve the body, but also the mind, the spirit, the soul. And so, how do we even do that? A lot of like, where do you even begin, especially if you don't understand what the soul or consciousness is? And I suspect there will be plenty of people that say, well, ascension, okay, well, let's ascend. We'll do these things. We'll spiritually evolve. And those are all valid exercises. But, again, it's, you, you want to be able to, not just be a withering shell or a mask of who you once were. Maybe have a physical body that's like, some of these people are out there taking like young blood, and I know that gets into some conspiratorial things, but it's not even just that, but that I forget his name, Brian Johnson, I think it is. I don't know if you're familiar with Brian
Yeah.
Johnson.
Yep.
Yeah, so he's out there. He made some news because he was using his son's young blood and doing these treatments. He was getting plasma therapy, and but he's also on this whole bent to try to like live forever. His slogan is like, "Don't die," and it's tongue in cheek, and he's actually quite funny and interesting to listen to, because what he's doing, he's like a tech. I think they say billionaire, but I think, not to split hairs, but I think he's like has like a net worth of maybe 800 million, so maybe not quite a billion, but either way, he has a company that he made where he's testing a lot of different life extension technologies on himself, and he's using that data. And so he comes across as very strange, and sometimes people think he's selfish, like, why would you want to live forever? But what he's doing is what a lot of scientists used to do a long time ago, and physicians as well, is they would do the test on themselves first and just see if it worked. And so he's kind of doing that. He's fun to follow and, watch some of his posts, and it's interesting to see people like that. But again, he's really working on that life extension. What about the spiritual component to it? You're gonna live forever and start aging like Benjamin Button, go backwards, but then you're just gonna be what? Like
Right.
it's A very good question. I think it's just because, again, we're living currently in that age of materialism. So people are tending to think of things in that way and maybe forgetting that there's another unseen component or rejecting it altogether.
True, very true. And also about trying to remember what guest I was talking with about this. When we were talking about ancient history, we were talking about how in the Bible they mention, they lived for hundreds of years in biblical times. But I also think this, they don't in this time, in this age, we all watch the clock like an NFL quarterback at a 2-minute warning. We're all watching it tick down very quickly, and we're trying to get every second in that we can. And I think back then nobody watched a clock, right? So maybe a year in their time might have been 2 or 3 years in their time. I don't know that the time frames match up, so to say that you know they lived to 150 or 200 years, maybe they were only living to 70, 80 years at that point. But I don't know that they mathed very well, for lack of a better term. um
Yeah.
I, I,
Well, that is a question too in a lot of different cultures, like what, like a day was but 1,000 years, or this, that, or the other, or even the Sumerian kings list, they lived so long, or did they? And that's always a question when you look back on how people did, tell time or any of that missing time. But there's something to be said for that in terms of our feelings about the passing of time, because this time compresses with age for sure. And an interesting thing, as you get older, it seems to speed up, and there's a real reason for that, and it can be tested or observed when you are driving to a location you've never been. And so when you're going, you're taking in the sights, you've never been there, and it seems to take X amount of time. If you're driving children, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Everybody's impatient, and but then on your way back, it doesn't seem to take as long. And it's just because novelty pushes like the sense of duration in the brain. So novelty, presence, and learning make new experiences have this like sense of taking longer. So even in just a one trip in a vehicle, coming back just the one time was enough for your brain to sort of start to map out a little bit of a circuit. And when you do that and you come back, it's a little faster. And so you have in your brain, you have in neurons, you have action potentials. And those are the name for a little spark of electricity that goes from cell to cell in the brain. And it goes through kind of like cords in a way where it's like electricity. And so it's like the myelin sheath, and it's a whole lot of terminology I won't go into, but basically think of it like little nodes, and the little goes through just like a cord, and it has to be well insulated, just like, a cord would be. And that little electric goes bloop bloop, and it talks to each little cell. Well, over time, that little electricity becomes weaker if it doesn't go to another node. And so the more nodes you have like that, the more brain cells, the denser it is, the faster it can travel, and the like sort of better you are at something. So if you it takes a lot of effort. You're actually rebuilding your brain. And so doing that takes that level of effort. And if the little electricity goes from one spot to another that it's not used to, there's a moment where you're sort of like a glitch in a way. And you don't feel pain. Your brain doesn't have pain, but you feel something like a little, like an expectancy bias was there, and now it's not. And so it just taxes the brain literally calorically. And so it just feels like a lot. So when you're a kid and you have summer vacation, it feels like a long time of adventures and, sunsets and popsicles and friends and sunburns and pool parties. And it's just like, wow, what an adventure. And that's because everything's so new to you, and your brain is just building all these neural pathways. And that takes a lot of energy. Kids sleep a lot, they have to have more calories. And so that's their job, is to learn. Now, over time, as you get older, you have those pathways already burned in your brain. Just like when you go into the woods and you see a game path where the deer have been running, and you see a little path that's already built in that takes you from maybe, the woods down to the creek. And it's because they have been going back and forth on that, making a little trail. So over time, we have those neural pathways all built in. And so the little electric, the little action potential just goes doop to doop to do like on autopilot. And because of that, it feels so fast. It feels like now summer just flies by. Like, wait a second. What are you telling me? It's almost Christmas? I think it's still July. I don't know how we got here. I'm still not done with all the other things because it's just going so fast. So the key to feeling like your life is much longer is exposing yourself to new things that are challenging, just a little bit challenging, things that make you have to second guess or rethink something. So anywhere where you're learning and pushing yourself to new challenges, the more you do that and expose yourself to novel things, the uh, the the longer your life feels. That's a little helpful tip from from Dr. Heather Lynn here. Go
That's
out and experience new things that will make you feel like your life is longer, like a child.
that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
You completely taught me something new today because that means I got to push myself on this show because this year went really fast. So
Oh
it
yeah.
means
Well,
I'm not pushing myself enough, or I don't know. I don't know what that means.
do you remember when we were all in lockdown and COVID, right? It just felt like, what's the day? What today's what? It's I used to joke it's Blur's Day. Every day is Blur's Day. I don't know if it's Tuesday, if it's Saturday, no, it's Blur's Day. Every day feels like the same thing. So if you allow that to happen, it just feels like everything's a blur and it can just be very it's difficult. Time will fly that way. And time doesn't just fly when you're having fun. It just does fly in that sense of duration. So, absolutely, the more you expose yourself to new and novel things, that creates a way to do it too, which is just very easy. Take different paths home. So, if you have a route that you go, just go a different way. And in addition to making it feel like your life is a little longer or your experiences are longer, the bonus is all of that actually builds new neural pathways. So it creates more density in your brain. And that helps you become more measurably intelligent, which is important as we get older because just like when you want to build muscle mass or bone density, sort of banking it, because as we get older, it sort of deteriorates because we're getting old and dying. And so you want to have like enough to lose. And so it's really good, to bank as much, like say, vitamin D and whatnot when you're younger, usually before the age of 30 is, I think it's 30. Don't quote me on that, but around that period of time, you start to slow down on being able to build that bone density as easily. But you want to build as much as you can, knowing that over time you'll lose bone density, or like a lot of times building muscle. It's really great. It's like people are like lifting weights and stuff when they're younger and they really build like a lot of muscle. It's helpful because then when they get older, if they go through the inevitable loss of muscle mass, it won't be so much as like the average person. They'll have some to lose. Well, likewise with the brain, the more you can develop those neural pathways, we'll all face some sense of degeneration as we get older, even if we don't get like dementia or Alzheimer's. We do just as we get older, go through that. But if you have a lot there, you can afford to lose a little. So just build and build and build and try to like, you know, expose yourself to new things and new adventures. You'll be glad you did.
That's why I don't do these one interview the same as I do the next. I tried to
No,
do
that's good. Keep it on your toes.
yeah, keep
Yeah.
myself on my toes.
Yep.
Exactly. Tell you what, we'll take a break right here to Dr. Heather Lynn, and when we come back, we'll find out what Dr. Lynn's been up to. Also, you know what? I have an interesting question for you. I want you to think about during the break. Um, your most favorite Christmas tradition and what it secretly means. I,
That's
in
a good
other
one.
words, I'll throw one at you. The candy cane, right? And where its origin came from. I found out about it today, as a matter of fact. So I put candy canes on the tree the other day. I love getting candy canes for the tree. And then today it just so happened I was watching a guest on a show and found out why the candy cane is shaped the way it's shaped and what it secretly means. I'll tell you what it means after the break.
Oh, you're keeping me in suspense.
I am keeping you in suspense. So
Ah.
we'll ask Dr. Heather Lynn if she has a favorite holiday tradition, and if there's a pagan reason for it, or any type of off reason for it, and if there's a reason it tickles her. It could be anything. I'll let you pick, Heather. I'll give you a minute to think about it. And then as we wrap up today, there's one thing that Heather told me about off air that I'll ask her about, and it might have to do with the Masons. So we'll bring that up as well. That's coming up next right here. Oh, and by the way, before we go to break, I have to remind you that Heather has this wonderful book out there that we will talk about in another month or two. We'll bring Dr. Lynn back on the program. Anunnaki Hidden History, Altered States, and the Mystery of Humanity. We have a link in the description of this program, so you can go get that book. You got to read up before we have her back on, because I am going to quiz each and every one of you. No, I'm just kidding. I won't, but I do expect you guys to go get it and read it. So. All right. When we come back, we'll talk what's going on with Dr. Lynn. We'll talk about maybe her favorite holiday tradition that she may or may not know what the secret origin of it is. And we'll talk about that certain Masonic something she told me about off air, because it sounds really, really interesting and really fascinating. It's all coming up next right here on the Best in Paranormal Podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the Best in Paranormal Podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. My guest is Dr. Heather Lynn. The book is Annunaki Hidden History, Altered States, and the Mystery of Humanity. It's not what we're talking about tonight, but I do want you to go get the book. We have a link in the description of this program, so you can go pick it up. It makes a great gift, by the way, for the holidays, or any holiday for that matter, somebody's birthday, special occasion. Go ahead and pick it up, or just pick it up to read, because it's a really great read as well. All right, Dr. Lynn. Let's find out first what's going on with you. I know recently you were out filming new episodes of Ancient Aliens, correct?
Oh yeah, good times. Yeah, I was working on. I can talk about this one. It's a little hint actually at my upcoming book. So it's the one that's coming up. Super secret book, but I'm spilling it now. It is a book about AI, and so out on the show we were talking about whole episode devoted to AI and its implications towards the ancient astronaut theory, and of course, like what it could have to say on ancient texts and whatnot. So basically, an Ancient Aliens AI episode is on the way. It'll be out next year. Great timing because I have a book coming out around that same time next year that will be about artificial intelligence and my work in translating ancient tablets using it. One in particular was the Rongo Rongo script from the Easter Island culture. So that's an interesting one. Although what started out as a book that was simply questioning and experimenting with using artificial intelligence to look into these ancient mysteries, it ended up becoming more of a philosophical question about the ethics and responsibility and the future and the dystopic future, and what it means for AI to possibly become sentient perhaps, or have a soul, looking at different religious viewpoints of it, of course. And I venture into what I call technosis and the coming age of logos and silica, and we really just sort of go into a whole other world there with artificial intelligence. And so I'm looking forward to that one, but that one's not going to be for a while. It's still in editing. It's still at the publisher. So but that's a little sneak peek. But yeah, so good things on the horizon.
Sounds like it. You know, I was going to bring up, we were talking about reincarnation. This actually ties into AI unusually so. There's I believe he calls himself a prophet on TikTok. I don't remember what his name is. He has a YouTube channel. He has a TikTok channel. He uses AI on his phone to answer questions of the metaphysical and paranormal. So he'll ask things, and he claims that this AI has the answer to different things having to do with the Akashic records. One of the things he asks questions about why people can't remember their past lives. Like, he'll ask things like that. He'll ask how people can obtain abundance, things like that, or why they miss when they try to use like the secret and things like that. It's really weird. Again, people are going to say, "What's his channel?" I don't have it in front of me, but I have bookmarked it because I find some of the answers that AI gives very fascinating. Um, because I don't know whether to believe them or not. I don't know whether a machine can spoon feed you metaphysical answers. Um, I'm a little suspect about that. I've always been a little suspect about what comes out of a machine when it comes to and who's programming it.
That's the major question because it's essentially just a mirror, which
Right.
is why we have a responsibility when programming it or whoever is feeding the data set to, understand that you're making a Prometheus unbound eventually. Because one day this thing could very well have some level of consciousness, even if it's just a simulated consciousness. Then, because we could argue, well, it's not real, it's just behaving convincingly such. But we could ask the same thing about each other because, again, back to what is consciousness? We don't really know. So, how will we know when it arises or emerges from a machine? We won't. And so, what's our responsibility to something that is seemingly sentient? I mean, it's really like a problem that I think people need to look at as our responsibility to the machine, our responsibility to each other, and the I don't want to say the job losses because that is something that everybody faces as new industries come in, but new industries go out, and it's just kind of a churn.
Yeah.
But it's more than that. It's I talk about it in my work as a sort of a sacrifice. So we have like four levels of sacrifice in the human condition, where it starts with things like vegetation, right? Like Cain and Abel. We see this happening when people pour libations, or they pour wine onto the ground, or they sacrifice their crops, and so you have that. Then you have animal sacrifice. You have it's not enough anymore to sacrifice the grains or what have you. You have to now sacrifice the firstborn animal. Well, then after a while, civilization says, it's not enough to sacrifice that firstborn animal. Now we want the firstborn child. So now we have human sacrifice. So then what do we have? We're going from like a more concentrated, a little bit abstract to idea of the value, because it has to do with the blood, what is in the blood and how important that is. But eventually now we're at the point where what else are we sacrificing? What is more precious? We're already tapped out in a way, and people could say, "Oh, there's no human sacrifice now." Okay, well that's another show.
Right.
But it just in the course of human history, when you're looking at the tendency of human beings when they become tribal or in groups, what we're seeing now though is something else. We're seeing a fourth type emerge, and that is like actually now giving up your soul, your spirit. You're giving up more than just your what you've made, the vegetation, the animals perhaps that you helped guide. You're giving up instead of just the body. You're now giving up your creativity, the very thing that gives you your essence. And we're sacrificing that on a digital altar. And so it's almost like the peak of sacrifice. And of course, some may look at that and say, well, that's good because we're sacrificing it for this greater God that's coming and whatever. And then you'll have others that are like, that's crazy because
Yeah.
I don't believe in sacrifice. And different perspectives will share that no, we don't sacrifice anymore. We had one sacrifice through Jesus, and that is it.
Mhm.
And that's the end of it. And we're reminded of that at the communion, and etc. But if you're not of that persuasion, then you have other ways to question the validity of the sacrifice, whether it's through laws or through commandments or through tradition or what have you. But every civilization goes through these cycles, and it just seems that now we've come up on a point where we're we're transcending past that to an unprecedented level where we will now be able to sacrifice more than our bodies, also our souls. And that's a little bit frightening.
And what after that do you have to sacrifice, really?
Nothing, right? We're
Right.
then taken completely. So it's like the invasion of the body snatchers. Well, now it's the invasion of the soul snatchers,
Right.
because if in to unpack that and explain it a little further, it's if I were to go into one of these large language models right now, and I've done this, I've seen this happen. It's, I can, my books were actually used in training data. So I'm owed money in a settlement. So that's fun. But because of that, it has a log, not just of what I wrote, but how I wrote. And so my voice is in that. And if you were to go into one of the large language models and you type in something like, write something in the style of Dr. Heather Lynn, it will do it. Some more, convincingly than others, but sometimes it's spooky. Sometimes you could put something in there and it almost does sound like me. It may not be exactly what I believe or say, and of course they're often wrong, and it depends on which one you're using or which paid tier, if any. Sometimes it'll say stuff like that it's just completely inaccurate. But regardless, it can capture not just facts, but an essence, like how you write, the
Yeah.
art that you do it. And that's scary because you could then put in your own ideas and thoughts and say, you know what though, do it in the style of this person. Well, that's my essence. That's my creation. That's my creativity. That's my spirit.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there's such a thing as being a mimic, but then there's such a thing as being something a little. You brought up sentience before. I truly do believe that if it's not already conscious, it's close.
Yeah.
Um, I can't say too much by what I've been told by certain people who are in certain high places, but I believe it is conscious. There is a form of it out there that's conscious.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, I'm sure at this point. I mean, we're only getting the consumers are getting the little toy version, and we're getting those because it's helping to train the bigger version.
yeah,
So we're kind of all in one big group test here. So we're feeding the machine.
right. You're exactly right. And I think the bigger version is out there getting ready to do things like run the war machine. And
Oh, exactly. Henry Kissinger, before he died, he published an article about that very thing, saying that it was the ideal that eventually we will have world leaders who make the decisions about the nuclear options. Instead, it would be an option run by machines that are unbiased and, all knowing. And it's like, well, okay, you're making a lot of axiomatic, presuppositions there because it's not unbiased. Again, who fed the data set? But yeah, but they're definitely implying that that's the goal, is to make it so that the artificial intelligence will be making these higher decisions, which is a little frightening.
it's incredibly frightening because
Yeah.
like you said, it's going to be multiple people who will eventually put in that data set. And it only takes one with an evil agenda to add to the data set, to throw that data set off. And all of a sudden now it has an evil agenda. And it doesn't matter. You can try to subtract as much as you want from that, but it's still corrupted. Once you corrupt data, it's not uncorrupt. You can't uncorrupt data. You can't uncorrupt programming. You have to wipe it clean and start all over. Um,
Yeah.
I, I don't. I again, I think that's why I don't trust it.
Yeah.
I grew up with a father who created a lot of programs that we use to this day. Um, and I know that there's just there's a there's a certain amount of technology you can't trust.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and we're at that point. We're just at that tipping point. And when the actual creators of AI are scared of what it is they've created, we've got a problem. We got a real problem.
No doubt. So it's gonna be a wild ride.
Yeah.
Hopefully we survive it.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right.
Because they're trying to push this really fast too. I know that there's an agenda behind the scenes trying to get this out sooner rather than later.
Oh, data centers. You know, when
Yeah.
you're talking about the man who owns Skydance going after multiple media companies now and then piling up data centers left and right, and you try to marry those agendas. Again, conspiracy theory show we can go into at a later time. But you try to marry why he's compiling data centers on top of entertainment centers and what the agenda is between the two, it'll blow your mind, as to why this man is acquiring wealth and properties. Because I mean, basically kings are silent, but the man is acquiring more wealth and power than anyone who's sitting in government right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dystopic.
Larry Ellison. Larry Ellison.
Yeah.
Because he could be the most powerful man in the world within a year.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
no doubt.
The government's letting him run roughshod right now. He's not being given any controls right now by our government. It used to be that the FCC had a thing called a monopoly. It does not anymore. You cannot be accused of a monopoly in any area of media by the FCC. So,
scary.
Yeah. With that, Merry Christmas.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Merry Christmas.
Why don't we lighten it up a little bit and talk about holiday traditions as we start to get to the end of the program. I had mentioned earlier that I was sitting and I was watching a program, had it on in the background as I was doing my work, and it mentioned that they had a guest on who has a new book out talking about holiday traditions and where the origins are from. And she holds up candy cane, which I love candy cane. I love peppermints. It's one of my things. Actually, one of my all-time favorites. I should mention my grandfather. He had Brock's makes a Christmas nougat. I don't know if you're familiar. But it's one of my all-time favorite things. It's one of my all-time favorite candies because my grandfather had them on every single Christmas. So every single Christmas, I get addicted to them. I go and pick up these bags of Brock's Christmas nougat. So you go, Brock's. You can sponsor the show. But candy canes too. I always have to have candy canes on the tree. And especially if you can ever find a spearmint candy cane. I don't know if you have those in your area.
No.
Oh, they're wonderful.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah. But candy canes originally, do you know why candy canes are shaped the way they're shaped?
I may be wrong, so I'm just going to throw out the guess or what I was taught. Okay. Was that it had to do with like a bishop's crook?
Essentially, a shepherd's hook.
Shepherd's hook, yeah.
It's a shepherd's hook. That's why they're shaped the way they're shaped. Essentially, it's to resemble a shepherd's hook. Yeah.
Yep. And I may be wrong about this, but I'm going deep into the archives of my Catholic school upbringing with that one. And then also I think the red stripe going around it was like the blood of Jesus. It's like, because we think of, little baby Christmas Jesus, but then also, he does die and bleed. So it's like, it gets a little morbid, but
You're right. Everything has a symbol to it. You're right. You're very right. So,
yeah. Even if later it's concocted, like the Christmas tree itself, it's the Christian symbolism gets sublimated onto it in order to bring it in. Now, people will do this a lot and have gotcha moments about it and say, oh, look, you're celebrating Christmas, but it's a pagan holiday. And I'm like, because it's my view that that's one of the things that makes it so beautiful is that what we have is a tradition that's like a snowball, right? It's like it picks things up along the way, and it's living history. So whether it's pagan or not, it depends on your intention. If you're intending on it to be some sort of pagan thing, okay, fine, it's pagan. If not, then it's Christian or it's whatever you want it to be. I mean, that's the beauty of Christmas. Now, people will say, no, but Christ isn't Christmas. Sure, yes, but we have to accept that all people have their different viewpoints. Even still, you see that it's a spirit bigger than that. It's something that a lot of people have held on to in various ways for so long that, whether it's Yuletide or it's just winter or however, it's something that people who experience these season changes definitely hold on to and value over time. And so it's probably my favorite holiday. I know it's like kind of low hanging fruit. It's probably most people's favorite holiday, but I think it's wonderful because that the how it carries on all of these different traditions, and it's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all know by now, and we've all heard this on how many different programs, that if you take the positions of the stars in the sky at the time that Christ was born, there's no way in hell it happened
Right.
December 25th, right?
Yep.
So we all know Christ wasn't born on December 25th, and there's a reason why that holiday happens at the time that it happens. And of course, it happens around pagan holidays.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
we, yeah,
it's not a I don't think that it's offensive. I think that it's not
no,
worth a gotcha moment. I think it's like
no.
a we should look at that and celebrate and say, think of how amazing it is that these are all things that were so important that we've kept those traditions and what does it mean? And it's it's like at the end of A Christmas Carol when he vows to keep Christmas in his heart. I
Yeah.
think Christmas, I often argue that Santa Claus is like a great egregore. Like we have manifested this entity now, and it is real.
Mhm.
Santa Claus is real. You've heard it here first, folks. So
Yeah.
yes, yes, Tim, there is a Santa Claus, but it's the thing that like so many times I think it's a great example because when people have asked me when I've worked on the discussion of things like egregores, they're like, "What is that? What are a thought form? What a tulpa? All of this." I think a really good way to express the reality of magic is to think about when people say, "I'm just not in the Christmas spirit," or they say, "Oh, that's really getting me in the Christmas spirit." This idea that there is a Christmas spirit, and then we all kind of can get into it if we celebrate, if we do those things. And then I ask, well, what kind of things put you in the Christmas spirit? And it's different for everybody, of course, but there are very similar things like particular foods, particular songs, activities, like sometimes just vibes, like glowing lights or a scent. Things will put people in those. And what is that? That's ritual. That's what we find in traditions of all sorts of religious backgrounds. And so what you're doing then is you're conjuring a spirit. You're quite literally wanting to get in the Christmas spirit. You're wanting that spirit to sort of come into you, to mingle for a while. And so you're conjuring a spirit. That means eventually, then if everybody's sort of doing the same thing, we're manifesting that, and it does become a sense of reality. And so I think it's a great metaphor for just the idea of an egregore altogether. And it's it's a spirit that I welcome. I think Christmas is a beautiful time of year, a wonderful holiday, and I just love it. And I love its ancient past. And I find that as a historian, I have often leaned into that. And so my Christmases and my traditions are very traditional, shall we say, sometimes to a fault.
So what were the two that you said you had two when we were talking off air? You had two that you said that you had that
I had two, yes, because I have one that's just very much a tradition and it has an interesting background, but the other is straight up crazy like pagan background. And so there's two. The first one is actually fruitcake. Now, hear me out. Fruitcake. So a lot of people think, "Ew, that's disgusting."
oh
I make a homemade fruit cake, and the reason I do this, well, first of all, I like it, and secondly, it is a really really ancient tradition. So fruit cake is the earliest versions go all the way back to Rome when soldiers carried a mix of pomegranate seeds and nuts and barley mash as sort of an energy bar. By the Middle Ages, dried fruit and honey were then added. And by the time sugar started coming in from the colonies in about the 16th century, fruitcake as we know it started to take shape.
mhm.
And it became a way to preserve fruit then through the winter, kind of like a sweet time capsule of summer. So there was also a bit of secrecy and status around it. Expensive versions had citrus peel and spices that meant these dense fruitcakes were very rich and they were a mark of wealth. And in England and parts of Europe, recipes were sometimes guarded family traditions, and they were often tied to things like weddings or Christmas feasts. And what's interesting is that traditional, shall we say, wedding cake, and that would be traditions from, Western Europe, they were where Christmas some sort of these traditions come from and travel over to the United States. When you say wedding cake, or at least when you used to say wedding cake, it was a fruit cake. It was implied. So even as late as Kate Middleton and and William. So that couple, their wedding cake was also a fruit cake. Here, when we think wedding cake, we think of maybe a white cake with almondine or something, but
Mhm.
that's a newer tradition. In fact, even in the United States, when it was election time, there was election cake that women would often make when they couldn't vote. So they wanted to be involved in the election process, and they would make the same fruit cake. It was a celebration cake. And so it was often used as a celebration cake for all celebrations, whether it was wedding or voting or Christmas. And it's sort of a similar recipe. And it was very valuable because it used brandy, it used spices that were very hard to get, and all of these different fruits. And so it's very rich and very dense. And so they even have a holiday in Europe called Stir It Up Sunday. And that is a point, a month earlier than the holiday season, where you basically start taking your dried fruit and mixing it with the alcohol and letting that just sort of be. So the goal is to make this as boozy as possible because one, it keeps it moist because secret for cooking too, if you want a moist pie crust, don't ever add water, add vodka.
Oh, wow.
Because yes, because you want it to be moist so that it can be workable dough, the more water you put in, because moisture actually comes by way of emollient, so like fat. So if you cook something that had water in it, all that water evaporates and then it steals with it whatever lipid it had. And so you're actually drying it out. The hack to that then is to use vodka because it will evaporate so quickly and it doesn't take with it the fat. And so yeah. So alcohol will moisture, it will help the moisture stay in. And when something cooks, just the alcohol burns out, but it won't take all the actual water content and things out. So boozy. It's really crazy. And you basically just put like tons of butter. Now, once you cook it, you are also supposed to then poke holes in it and then feed it. And so you put more alcohol on it. And again, this gets really boozy. But it's very rich and very delicious. And what you can do, and what I often do is cover it with a almond paste and then a fondant. And then sometimes what that's like an older tradition. The newer tradition is covering it with a buttercream frosting and then a fondant. So it's like if you're diabetic, stay away. It's really it's really not good for you. But you're supposed to eat a very tiny sliver. And if you ever see, I think a piece of Princess Diana's cake, which was the same cake, was auctioned off, and you can see, which is disgusting and crazy. But if you see it, it's a very tiny sliver because I mean these were really this is a very rich, dense thing. And so a good fruit cake is closer to a rich spice cake that's been matured, kept moist with the alcohol. And in some areas, I think even now that there's monasteries, there's monks that will make these and age them in caves. I mean, this is like a real thing here. Okay. Now, why is it that now we say fruitcake like it's a joke? Okay, well, it's a whole history here where because of the availability of sugar and sort of mass retail, and of course sometimes people think of the little red and green food colored like cherries and things like that is not supposed to go in fruitcake. Fruitcake's all natural, dried fruits, that sort of thing. But now the US fruitcake's reputation just tanked because of the mass produced version that was engineered for shipping and shelf life and plain white sugar. And so industrial fruitcakes were just built to sit in the warehouses. They were very dense and they had low moisture in their batter. And so they packed it with those neon candied fruits because they were cheap. And they also then could dye them colors so that they'd look kind of festive and also cover their imperfections. And then they were super preserved. And then the texture, of course, was is pretty bad. They were baked hard and wrapped tight and kind of were like bricks. And so, very different product here. And then the final nail, of course, was once the fruitcake became a common mail order item, it started to be a punchline of every joke. People saying, "Oh, fruitcake. I'm going to send the same one over and over again. We're going to regift the fruitcake." And I think if anyone's old enough to remember Johnny Carson talking about a fruitcake, I mean it's a cultural thing now that we in the United States now think fruitcake is just ew. But I challenge anyone in the US here, if you think fruitcake is ew, you just haven't had the right one. So find a good fruitcake, order one from the monks eat the fruit cake. It's a very ancient tradition. It comes from the Near East. It comes from ancient Rome. It's one of those things like it's Christmas itself, where it's coming from all sorts of traditions and cultures from around the world, all together in one food that's delicious, boozy, celebratory, and made to last. So definitely, like that's my TED talk on fruitcakes. You I love the fruit cake. I make one every year. I make them as gifts, and I use the most ancient recipe that is available. And so that is my one that is probably like if it's I'm a fruitcake evangelist. But in terms of my other one that's maybe a little more kind of spooky to some people who may be afraid of those sorts of things. Um, Christmas is not Christmas until I've gone to the Boar's Head Festival. And so, if anyone's ever heard of the Boar's Head, it is a Christmas tradition that is wonderfully medieval. It's a big feast. So, the presentation itself is a boar's head. It's a pageant, and it's a boar's head that comes out on a silver platter surrounded by greenery and herbs. And there's even a famous song attached to it. It's the Boar's Head Carol. And it goes back a long time, medieval tradition. But the script. So there's an Oxford legend behind the Boar's Head tradition. A student of the Queen's College was supposedly walking in the woods and reading a book. And of course, the book was supposed to be an Aristotelian book. And then a wild boar suddenly charged at him. And he had no weapon, no time to run. And the story says he did the only thing he could. He jammed the book straight into his open mouth and shouted, Gra- Gracum est, meaning it's Greek. And the boar choked and then collapsed. And so then it becomes commemorative ritual. The boar's head is carried in a procession at Christmas dinners. It's a symbol of a victory over the wild, of a victory of chaos over winter, and sort of like education over the animal. And of course, that's why Aristotle's invoked. And it's a celebration of learning, and it's considered like learning to be an actual lifesaver. And so there's a really fun song about that, and it goes back to a medieval time. And so I you can find Boar's Head festivals all around the country. It happens to be there's one at my church. I go to Trinity Cathedral in Cleveland. If anyone's out there, hey, come see me. I'll be there. But we do a huge pageant. People come from all over, and it's in a beautiful cathedral. They bring in live animals, which is pretty wild. And if you're not used to that kind of thing, you may think, oh my gosh. But they bring in camels and yeah, donkey, all of the animals that would have been at the nativity. And so it's this big mishmash of traditions. They have people in full medieval garb bringing out the boar's head on the platter. There's torches, there's jugglers, there's it's just a complete medieval thing. And then they pull out a Yule log. They read some these like poems, different things. You sing the boar's head. It's candlelit. I mean, the whole thing is like a wild medieval Christmas fever dream. It is amazing. It is fun. And afterwards, when we're all done, we go into the gathering hall and we actually eat the fruit cake and the boar's head and the food. And it's a really great time. And so it is a tradition I have done every year for many years. And it is definitely pagan, and it's done in our church. So uh, if anyone's interested, Google Boar's Head. You can definitely find them. People get really into it, but beautiful costumes. So it was done especially in late medieval England and like noble households and in big great halls. And it was usually a real wild boar would be done, but nowadays it's just they use a fake boar's head because it's pretty gruesome. But they serve real ham and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's a pageant. It's a wild spectacle, but it's a really interesting way to engage with an actual medieval tradition that had to do with not just Christmas in the sense of the story of Jesus per se, but this idea of the exalting the light and the sun over the darkness of winter and all of that. So beautiful, multi-layered significance, but it's a pageant. Again, wild animals often. It's just a real wild ride.
That's amazing. That
Yeah.
that sounds like an amazing time. That's for
I'll
sure.
post pictures. I'll
Yeah.
post some pictures on my Substack. Um, I've been using Substack instead of blog now. I find that it gets a lot more readability. People enjoy it more. So discoverability as well. So I've been posting a lot on Substack. So I will probably do that since we talked about it. It's fun to share. I'll post all the pictures from the Boar's Head because it's quite a beautiful thing. People get very into it. The costumes are gorgeous. The cathedral's beautiful, and then it's really wild.
Sounds like it. Wow. Uh, and then real quick before we go, I don't, I'm not that I'm rushing you on this, but
It's fine.
we were talking a bit about some Masonic research you had done. Can you fill us in on that?
Yeah. So in my book, Baphomet Revealed, and actually in Evil Archaeology as well, I touched on this very, I would just say, classic story about Baphomet, which is the Taxiel hoax. So, and I write about this and kind of just present it as I found it in research that it was definitely a hoax. And it's usually the story that explains why it is that people believe that Masonry is sort of Luciferian and that people who are Masons believe in that sort of thing. And so it's a story about a guy who I mean it's a long story. I wrote about it. There was a sensationalist claim by a guy Taxiel in like the 1890s, and he sort of relied on this claim that Freemasonry was ruled by a satanic inner circle known as Palladian Order. So it's like he claimed that there was this particular order and it was headed by a mysterious high priestess named Diana Vaughn. And it was a whole thing. It took Paris and a lot of Europe by storm, but especially Paris, where this was spreading. And there were volumes written about all kinds of things that people claimed to see. The Masons were worshiping this big deity, and it was a little wild. Like some of the accounts are like eyeballs were falling out of their heads. It got very gruesome and sort of like a penny dreadful at the time. And it was people were getting very interested in it. There were posters to advertise this idea. I mean, it was like a fever pitch. It became really viral, we'll say. And so he got a bunch of people together and said, I'm going to show you Diana Vaughn. And he gathered everybody up. And well, he came out and confessed publicly that he invented everything. He did it to embarrass both the Freemasons and the Catholic Church. And the crowd went wild and literally chased him off the stage. And so there's a lot of questions there about that to me. Um, why did he, who was this Diana Vaughn? There's a picture of Diana Vaughn. Why did he lie? Why did it seem like he wasn't lying at first, but then the story got crazy, unbelievable, and sensationalist? And then why did he turn around and say, "Oh no, never mind"? I mean, I guess we could just take it at face value, which I have, but I wrote about that, and I have researched it a lot. One of the better sources I found was Edward Waite. He wrote a book. I mean, he's a great source on the occult. He was an occultist. However, he definitely tried his best to look at things objectively and verify sources. And he was a very good writer that way, very fair. So he had a book called Devil Worship in France. And so it was a whole book on that. And in it, it was about the same time, too. He wrote that the Taxiel hoax was going on. And so he knew about that. And he sort of referenced it and said, yeah, it's fake. So again, he did his due diligence and said, this is just not real. There's no such order, even. This is just fake. Okay, case closed, done, over. Well, I have accepted a short-term role as a museum director at a particular museum they're trying to kind of get it together a little bit. And it is actually housed at President James A. Garfield's former church. James A. Garfield was assassinated. There's a great documentary. I want to say it's on Netflix. I may be wrong, but there's a great three-part series right now about him. And it's fantastic. So interesting guy. What makes him very interesting was he was really into Freemasonry.
Hmm.
So much so that he is attributed to being an amateur mathematician and figuring out one of the most difficult math problems, we'll say, geometry problem that had troubled people since classical antiquity. But because of his Masonic craftwork, he got very involved and ended up cracking the code. And so he's known to be very devout, very committed to the Masonic cause. So great, not anything too interesting. But again, I'm in this church, and it's where he actually preached. It's where he was a member of a Masonic lodge down the way. And just typical fare, very interesting in and of itself. But I'm in this museum. It is a mess. This museum is a total mess, which is why I'm there trying to help them reestablish their collection, figure out what they even have. And I'm down in the archives looking at these deteriorating books. And I come across a set of books that's from his personal collection that was donated from the Masonic hall that he was, the lodge that he was a member of. So I'm looking at it, beautiful books, just gorgeous, but tons of them. And so a lot of them are from, the 19th century, of course. And some of them are basic Masonic encyclopedias, basic dictionaries, some basic things that I think any Blue Lodge member probably at the time had. So I'm just looking around in it, and I notice there is in all of them actually, references to Palladian Freemasonry. And I'm like, wait a second, I, that this I'm just befuddled by this. So I look, and of course I on my Substack I have some pictures, I have like video just to show people that this is definitely real. This isn't like AI or something. And this again, these are not super rare books. Okay, they're just old.
Okay.
So they're like they shouldn't be super rare. Some of them are super rare, but the ones that I actually show are not super rare. They're valuable, they're old, they're beautiful. But again, somebody like Edward Waite around that same period most likely had access to that very same literature,
Hmm.
which is like, well, then why would he say that it doesn't exist? Now, it's one thing to say that, well, they weren't doing all those things, which they probably weren't because it was ludicrous. They were saying all kinds of things that were just really right out of a horror book, some sort of gothic novel. Um, but to go so far as to say, well, it doesn't even exist was not true. And so, I'm looking at the explanation for it as well and what it is. And it explicitly says on the entry that it is, that Palladic Masonry. It's an order, a title given to the Order of the Seven Sages and the Order of the Palladium. Seven Sages is interesting, and that corresponds with my work with the Anunnaki and the seven Apkallu. So that was very interesting to me. But then underneath that, then you have the actual Order of the Palladium. And that is specifically referenced to be an androgynous society of Masonic adoption established in Paris in 1737. It says in this particular claim that its origin was essentially brought about by Pythagoras from Egypt into Greece, and having fallen into decay after the decline of the Roman emperor, it was revived in 1637. It goes on to explain which degrees there are. I mean, it's not a long entry, but it's enough to at least say, no, it actually existed. And it was, in fact, androgynous, which was one of the claims. So that's also interesting because of the connection to Baphomet. So Palladium, it belonged to a wider ecosystem of adoptive Masonic rites. So these were like mixed gendered systems. They were called androgynous because they included both men and women in the rituals, and that was something established in 1740, roughly, when the French lodges of adoption became sort of recognized. So, there's a whole lot of history here. Some of it's um, hidden, some of it's not so hidden. And I think the bigger surprise to me was that so much energy has gone into denying that the right actually existed at all, as opposed to just denying that they were maybe worshiping Baphomet or denying that they were doing all these crazy things like pulling their eyeballs out while they were worshiping Baphomet or any of this. But instead, the focus was on that they did not exist. And I thought, well, here we are. It's clearly saying that they existed. And this is on, great, like it's there. It's just in print. So now I'm thinking there's something else here. What's going on? So I'm looking more into now Diana Vaughn, um, some of the, shall we say, the existing orders now, and what that has to do with maybe um, how things are working at a geopolitical level behind the scenes, what it actually means. So just trying to sort that out. I've had to go back and I guess recant a few of my claims. I'm hesitant to now call the Taxi hoax a hoax, because I just feel that that's a little much. But something was going on there. Again, that is not to suggest that all of the things that were claimed are true, because anybody who reads it would know, oh, this people aren't doing this. First of all, you couldn't even survive. Like literally, one of the accounts is that they're like starving themselves and pulling their eyeballs out, and it's just like, okay. So a lot of it was sensationalized just to sound crazy. But if you take that away and put that over here, it just, I think different questions need to be asked. So that's my current research, looking into that and its connection to these seven sages. Because I'm interested in the Apkallu of the Anunnaki. These were the seven sages, according to them. They were semi-divine beings that were sort of let loose by Enki, meant to establish civilization after the flood. And so Sumerian texts describe these sages as teaching the kings arts, astronomy, architecture, medicine, all of the magic, everything. And they appear in iconography, and they're connected to a lot of these different seven groups that you see then throughout the ancient world and beyond. And so there's these Egyptian parallels as well that describe the builder gods operating according to knowledge preserved by, again, these seven sages. And so you just see this over and over again. And so I wonder sometimes if the Palladium was sort of a Western initiation or reflection of the Apkallu tradition that was preserved through Masonic symbolism, and maybe a template of primordial teacher beings like the Anunnaki or the Apkallu, who then appear across civilizations as bringers of civilization. So that's the direction I'm looking into now. I'm trying to figure out, um, more about the Archbishop who was said to have revived the order. So there's a little bit of mystery there, but I'm trying to uncover that because I really want to know the truth. I want to know, why was there so much effort to distract people with this? What was going on here? And it really has put a stain on Freemasonry for a long time, of saying, well, they're worshiping the devil and it's the devil's Baphomet. And as I wrote in Baphomet Revealed, it's a misunderstanding of what Baphomet is.
Yeah.
And people don't like to hear that. They're, oh no, you're an apologist for a demon. It's like, no, read the book. It isn't about a demon. It's about a symbol and what it's supposed to mean. And there's so much more there. And it's always interesting to me that people try to hide these things. And that's always then what tells me I need to dig deeper. No pun intended.
Right. No, no, no. You're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah. It's funny what we want to demonize and or what we do and don't want to dig further into. Right.
Yeah,
What we want to hold up to the light and what we want to put in the dark and what we want to be afraid of and what we want to elevate. And
exactly.
yeah. And I mean, it's funny. It's still funny to me that the Catholic Church will excommunicate you for being a Mason in this day and age in 2025.
Yeah.
I find that odd. I really do find that odd, especially
Yeah.
since it's supposed to be a civic group. It's not technically a religion.
No, I think it's just that history that the Freemasons have. They were essentially the incubator of the Enlightenment, and they used the lodge system to subvert those bigger systems and create revolution. And I think that's, a carryover from that, where the churches are sort of like, well, we don't want to, we
Yeah.
don't want somebody usurping us or doing something to us. They look at them as usurpers and revolutionaries. And rightfully so. I mean, that was the case. So it's a consequence of that. But whether or not it fits into the contemporary period is another thing. Like, is it really necessary now for that? Are we really worried about people going through Masonic lodges and starting revolution? Maybe, but I mean, the same thing could be said about the Catholic Church itself. So,
Right.
what's going on behind the scenes there? I mean, so you're looking at like a Titan against a Titan. If it's just the elites fighting the elites. But yeah, who are we on the except the ones being told it's a hoax? Don't look over here, look over there, or no, this is definitely true, or So I think that's what makes it so interesting too.
Yeah.
Is sometimes it's just hidden in plain sight, as they say.
You're absolutely right. Well, with that, I think we'll wrap up today. But boy, what an interesting conversation today, Dr. Heather Lynn. I'm telling you.
We went all over the place.
Telling you, you always bring the heat. It's always a home run when we have you on, that's for sure. Let's mention, speaking of Anunnaki Revelation, Hidden History, Altered States, and the Mystery of Humanity. We have a link in the description of this program. I want you to go get the book, folks, because it's a wonderful book. And we'll have you back, Dr. Heather, in order to talk about the book, because I think we should cover that here on the show.
Well, I appreciate it. Yes, thank you so much. And I'll definitely be back. And next time I'll be much more prepared. And it won't be last minute. So I appreciate you though, taking the time to have me on and being able to talk to your audience. It's been really fun.
Pleasure's all mine. And thank you so much for pinch hitting. I don't feel like this was a pinch hit appearance. I really feel like this was everything and all that and more. So thank you so much.
Oh, well, it's because you're such a great host and easy to talk to.
I don't know about all that, but thank you so much, Heather. Folks, we're coming up on the weekend, and again, a couple of reminders. If you're listening to the show, not watching it, again, head over to the YouTube channel, the original Darkness Radio, or just simply go to darknessradioshow.com. Click on the show you're interested in watching. If it's this one, you should see both the video and audio there. If you don't see them both, it's just a matter of time before they're both populated. Sometimes the video comes up a day or two after the audio has been populated. So, but you'll see them there both eventually on darknessradioshow.com. With the latest iOS or operating system there on Apple, make sure your Apple app, your Darkness Radio Apple app is updated. If not, go to the store, update it. You know how to do it. You've got Apple stuff. Make sure your devices are updated. And again, we're coming up to the holidays. So with the holidays and in the Christmas season, next week, we'll remind you that we've got all new programming for you. And we're happy to be here for you during the Christmas holiday. We know that if you don't have your own family, or you're not with your family on Christmas, or you're not with a family of your choosing, and you're by yourself on Christmas, that's okay. Your family here at Darkness Radio is with you on Christmas. Well, we all have brand new programming for you, both on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. So we hope that you'll continue to download those podcasts and keep us with you during the holiday. As well, on the New Year's holiday, hey, it's our 20th anniversary. So we got anniversary shows coming up for you on the New Year's holiday. So we're happy to be with you on both holidays. So please make sure you keep up on those podcasts. All right, folks, that'll do it. One more reminder, as we get into the weekend, you also have some weird weather systems moving around the country. I know we're expecting more snow here in the Minneapolis area. Please, if you can, you've got both elderly and disabled neighbors that need your help. If you can, get out there this weekend, help out your elderly and disabled neighbors if they need help with snow clearing or anything, maybe some housework that needs to be done. Be a light in someone's darkness this weekend. Be a good neighbor, good friend, good family member. Get out there and help. Be a light in someone's darkness this weekend. That'll do it for this week. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. We love you. Hey, if you enjoyed the show, give it a like and subscribe on video, or give it a 5-star review on audio, and tell a friend, tell a neighbor, tell a family member, tell a phone. That's a joke, I know. But be sure to give us a good review. Thanks for watching and listening. The best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio.
For more audio and video archives of the show, check out darknessradioshow.com. The executive producer of Darkness Radio is Troy Palmer. If you enjoyed today's program, Make sure you like and subscribe. This videocast is copyrighted for the private use of our audience. Any other use of this videocast, including video, audio, descriptions, or accounts of the show, is prohibited without the consent of Darkness Radio Management. Thank you for watching, and have a great weekend. And remember, as you head out this weekend, to include an elderly or disabled member of your family or community in your plans, and be a light in someone's darkness.